Welcome to the Blanco Wellness Podcast. Thank you for being here. Take a breath, settle in, and let's sit with a question today that most people carry quietly for years, without ever saying out loud. When did you stop feeling like yourself? Not in a dramatic way. There was probably no single morning where you woke up and recognized the loss clearly. It tends to happen the way water carves stone, so gradually and through such small increments that by the time you notice the shape has changed, you cannot point to the moment it began. Life kept moving, responsibilities accumulated, other people's needs made their claims, and somewhere inside all of that forward motion, something subtle happened. The person you once were, the one with particular instincts and particular enthusiasms and a particular way of moving through the world, began to feel strangely distant. Not gone, exactly. Just harder to locate. You kept showing up, you kept functioning, kept meeting the obligations, kept being what each situation required you to be. And yet underneath all of it, a quiet feeling persisted. That something important had been misplaced somewhere along the way, and that the life you were living, however respectable and however busy, did not quite fit the person living it. Many people know this feeling. Very few speak about it directly, perhaps because it is difficult to explain without sounding ungrateful for a life that, by most external measures, is perfectly fine. The loss rarely announces itself. It happens one small compromise at a time, a preference quietly set aside because someone else's felt more urgent, a direction abandoned because it seemed impractical, a part of yourself made smaller because it did not fit the role currently required. Each individual adjustment seems entirely reasonable. Accumulated across years, they can produce a life that belongs, in some meaningful sense, to the accumulated expectations of everyone around you, rather than to you. From the very beginning, people tell us who we should become, parents and teachers and friends and culture, and, increasingly, the relentless broadcast of social media presenting its images of how a successful, attractive, admirable life is supposed to look. After enough years of listening to all of it, it becomes genuinely difficult to distinguish your own voice from the chorus of everyone else's. The Taoists described every person as having a natural way of being, what they called Di, the inner virtue or character that belongs specifically to that person. The way water has its own nature, regardless of what shape it is poured into. This nature is not something acquired through achievement or constructed through self-improvement. It is already present, as the grain is already present in wood, as the note is already present in a tuned string before it is played. The difficulty is not its absence. The difficulty is that noise, the noise of expectation and comparison, and the relentless pressure to be other than you are, drowns it out until it becomes difficult to hear. There is an old story about a sculptor at work on a large block of marble. A visitor watched him for several days and finally asked how he knew what the finished figure would look like before it appeared. The sculptor's answer was simple. "The figure is already inside," he said. "I am only removing what does not belong." This image inverts the way most people think about personal growth. The assumption is usually that growth means addition, becoming more, acquiring new qualities, building towards something you do not yet have. But the sculptor's answer suggests something different. That what is most genuinely yours does not need to be built from scratch. It needs to be uncovered, which means that some of the work is not adding, but removing, releasing the expectations that were never yours, retiring the identities that were adopted for other people's convenience, and making space for what was always there, to finally be heard. Comparison makes this considerably harder. and the modern world has made comparison almost inescapable. You see how others work, how they live, how they appear to experience things. And without quite deciding to, you begin measuring your own life against the images. The problem is not that other people's lives are irrelevant. Sometimes they offer genuine inspiration. The problem is that sustained comparison trains the attention outward. And the longer attention stays outward, the harder it becomes to hear the quieter, more internal signals that would actually guide you towards something true for you specifically. The Buddhist traditions placed genuine emphasis on solitude, not as isolation or withdrawal from care for others, but as the regular practice of creating conditions in which you are not required to be anything for anyone, where the performance can briefly stop, and what remains can be honestly observed. In those conditions, something tends to surface, not dramatically, not as revelation, but quietly. A feeling, an intuition, a recognition of what actually matters when the noise is not directing your attention elsewhere. Many people have experienced this during a walk taken alone, or a quiet morning before the household woke, or a moment beside water when the mind grew unexpectedly still. In those moments, something speaks that is not the voice of obligation or expectation. It is worth learning to recognize it because it tends to know things that the busier, noisier parts of the mind consistently miss. Returning to yourself is rarely a dramatic event. It does not tend to arrive as a sudden transformation or a moment of complete clarity after which everything becomes simple. It arrives as a series of small, honest recognitions. This feels true, and this does not. This belongs to me, and this was never really mine. This direction pulls me forward, and this one has been pulling me sideways for years. Each of these recognitions is small. Over time, they accumulate into something that begins to feel like a direction, a returning, gradual, and unglamorous, to a life that actually fits. There is courage required for this, worth naming plainly. Returning to yourself sometimes means disappointing people who preferred the version of you that was more convenient for them. It sometimes means changing directions that others had assumed were fixed. It sometimes means acknowledging to yourself and eventually to others that something you have been maintaining no longer fits who you are now. None of that is comfortable. But living inside a life that does not fit eventually produces its own exhaustion, the specific, persistent exhaustion of sustained pretense, and that exhaustion tends to cost far more than the discomfort of honest adjustment. As we close today, carry one question with you, not to force an answer, but to listen for one. What feels most true for you right now? Not most impressive, not most expected, not most aligned with what other people seem to want from you. Most true. The answer may arrive quietly, the way things do when they are genuine rather than performed. And wherever it points, however small, however different from what you have been doing, it is worth following a little further than you usually allow yourself to go. Thank you for being here with me today. Until next time, be well.